Let's take a look at Max's bone editing tools. The scene is continuing from the last lesson, only I've gone in and renamed each bone object according to the area that it would affect. So here's the femur bone. Next we have the tibia. And I'd like to point out a quick tip before we take a look at those bone editing options. If you like to move up and down your hierarchy, it's just a matter of using page up and page down. So with the tibia bone selected, if I were to use page down, notice that instantly will take me to the metatarsal bone. If we were to use page up, notice we can get right back to our root. Now with the root selected, let's say if we wanted to grab all children underneath it. All we'd want to do is hold down Control and use page down, and notice that we'll grab each bone. We have 6 in total. Now this doesn't work in reverse. If we were to select the hoof, hold down Control and press page up, we're not going to select the hierarchy above this object. Alright, so I wanted to point that tip out. I find it to be very useful. So let's go ahead and take a look at those bone editing settings. We'll move right back to the animation menu and grab our bone tools. So at the top we find the bone edit mode. This is a wonderful tool here because chances are when we initially create our skeleton, the bones aren't necessarily in the right spot. So after a bone has been made, we can use this tool to adjust its position. Just to show you how useful this is, let's say if we just wanted to adjust the root. Let's go to our Move tool. So we start to move this around, notice the entire hierarchy will be affected. However, if I were to undo this back, using Control Z, if we now enter bone edit mode and start to adjust the root, only the root will adjust. So again, that's a very useful tool, especially when we start to move down the hierarchy and we need to adjust the children. Okay, we'd want to use this tool most certainly to make sure that the bone is placed in the correct spot. It's also useful to take a look at the topology. That's why I'm working right now in wireframe mode. Or could always use wireframe on shaded, and you can kind of x-ray your mesh if that would help. To show you this, if we were to press F3 to go back to shaded mode, press F4, this will show us the wireframe on our mesh. And now with the mesh selected, if we were to use Alt X, notice that will now create a temporary transparent view on the selected mesh. So that's just a way to kind of see through and see where each bone is placed. But it's very helpful to keep track of your topology as you create your bone objects, because if the bones are not aligned with your topology, you'll most certainly see that error when you start to deform your character. You'll see that the bones are not deforming right because they're not in the correct spot. So that's a look at bone edit mode. Very useful for going in and adjusting each bone's position. Now, before we move from there, I'd like to point out another quick tip to you, and I'll go ahead and turn off X-ray with Alt X and just enter wireframe mode with F3. You'll see that if we select the bone and start to adjust it in bone edit mode, only that bone is affected. What if we wanted to slide the other objects down, the other child objects? Well, it'd simply be a matter of double-clicking on that bone, and now you'll see that we have selected all children in that hierarchy, and we can go ahead and adjust them that way. Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and now exit bone edit mode. And we can go ahead and take a look at some other options we have. So we can remove bones. If we had one selected, let's say the tibia bone, choose remove. Notice that's going to disconnect that bone and remove it entirely, and that takes the root above and it connects it to whatever the child was, the bone that we've just removed. Alright, so that's essentially what remove does. I'll go ahead and undo that back. We'll take a look at delete bone. That's simply going to separate that bone, remove it, but it's going to create a nub at the end of the root of that bone that we've just removed. So if we were to go ahead and take a look, if we were to grab this femur bone and start to rotate, you could see that no longer is the rest of the hierarchy connected to this root. We've separated those objects. Now let me show you something else. I'll go ahead and undo this back. Let's say if with this bone selected we were to use the delete key to remove that bone. We can do that as well, and we have something very similar to what happens when we use the delete bone tool, only there's no nub left. But let's say if we wanted to connect this back together. Well, it'd just be a matter of going in and selecting the bone object that we'd like to connect. We could use the Connect Bones tool just to grab the next bone down. And you can see that Max will actually go in and create a brand new bone between the two. And notice everything is again connected. So I find that to be another really useful tool. Great. Now Refine, again, another very amazing tool. If we need to add resolution to a bone, if we need to create more splits, chances are we need to do that to hold volume better in certain areas. Sometimes one bone won't cut it. So if we need to, we could go to Refine and we could start to segment our bone object. Now, if you're having difficulty doing that in the perspective view, you might find it to be a little bit easier to do this in an orthographic view. Sometimes it's best to work in an orthographic view when making these changes. But notice we can quickly just go in and segment each of these bones, which is very, very useful. Great. So another feature I enjoy using. We actually use this in our rigging wings tutorial. If you'd like to take a look, we go into a very extensive wing rig that will give you a lot of control, and in the end it will help you to create realistic animations for birds. But that's a look at Refine. We've already taken a look at Create End-to-End Connect Bone. Now let's say if we wanted to reverse our hierarchy here, we could use Reassign Root. So if we were to go ahead and take this nub, let's say if the nub was tired of being the nub and it wanted to be the parent, well, what we could do is use Reassign Root, and now that nub object is actually our new root. So this is cool. We could go ahead and select another bone here and assign that as our root, and now this bone right in the center is the root. Very cool. Okay, so we've taken a look at most of our settings except for mirror. What I'd like to do is pause the lesson here. In the next lesson, we'll go ahead and take a look at the mirroring tool. There's some things that we'll want to keep in mind when utilizing this tool. So let's say we go ahead and take care of that in the following lesson.